Welcome back to the Lagoon, everybody. We're here at the Grand Library once more, and we're going to read today The Doom That Came to Sarnath. And this is a fantasy short story written by H.P. Lovecraft. It is written in kind of like a mythic fantasy style and is a part of the Dream Cycle series, or otherwise known as Dream Cycle. It was first published in the Scott, a Scottish amateur fiction magazine, in June 1920. Now, as we know, within our first printing of our Dagon book here, the previous owner had ranked quite a bit of the stories that they have read. It looks like they didn't read too far in, or maybe this was some kind of old literary assignment they had. But anyways, they give The Doom That Came to Sarnath an F. I can't say I agree with that at all, although I can say that it is kind of shocking if the first time you read Lovecraft, you're going to start noticing now, especially with this story, that this is fantasy. And so, you know, some people don't like fantasy. And that's fine, you don't have to, right? Because you want the horror aspect and stuff like that. But within the horror universe that Lovecraft has, there is also, in the because of how his world is, there is a fantasy world within the dream world. And so some of those tales take place within the dream world. And what's cool is sometimes the characters from those dream worlds come into the waking world, and vice versa. And so, you know, it's kind of like, you can see how this very much inspired Stranger Things and some of those kind of, our more modern kind of horror films. Like, Lovecraft is a very influential writer. And some people don't like his fantasy, and that's fine. But I do, and I think it's awesome, because I like Lord of the Rings, I like, Conan the Barbarian, I like all that kind of stuff too. I love, all that fun stuff, like the Dragonlance books, all that kind of nerdy stuff, the Ravenloft, all that stuff. But anyways, we will read this and then move on to another Dream Cycle story after this as well. It'll be a separate video, and we'll speak a little bit on this story after we read it. But for now, get yourself all cozy and your drinks ready, because here we go. The Doom That Came to Sarnath by H.P. Lovecraft. There is in the land of Manar a vast still lake that is fed by no stream, and out of which no stream flows. 10,000 years ago there stood by its shores the mighty city of Sarnath, but Sarnath stands there no more. It is told that in the immemorial years, when the world was young, before even the men of Sarnath came to the land of Manar, another city stood beside the lake, the grey stone city of Ib, which was old as the lake itself, and peopled with beings not pleasing to behold. Very odd and ugly were these beings, as indeed are most beings of a world yet incoherent and rudely fashioned. It is written on the brick cylinders of Cathenron that the beings of Ib were in hue as green as the lake and the mists that rise above it, that they had bulging eyes, pouting flabby lips, and curious ears, and were without voice. It is also written that they descended one night from the moon in a mist, they in the vast still lake in grey stone city Ib. However this may be, it is certain that they worshipped a sea-green stone, idol chiseled in the likeness of Bokrug, the great water lizard, before which they danced horribly when the moon was gibbous. And it is written in the papyrus of Arlerneck that they one day discovered fire, and thereafter kindled flames on many ceremonial occasions. But not much is written of these beings, because they lived in very ancient times, and man is young and knows but little of the very ancient living things. After many aeons, men came to the land of Manar, dark shepherd folk with their fleecy flocks, who built Thra, Larnek, and Cathadarion on the winding river Ai. And certain tribes, more hardy than the rest, pushed on to the border of the lake and built Sarnath at a spot where precious metals were found in the earth. Not far from the grey city of Ib did the wandering tribes lay the first stones of Sarnath, and at the beings of Ib they marveled greatly. But with their marveling was mixed hate, for they thought it was not meet that the beings of such aspects should walk around the world of men at dusk. Nor did they like the strange sculptures upon the grey monoliths of Ib, for those sculptures lingered so late in the world. Even until the coming men none can tell, unless it was because the land of Manar is very still, and remote from most other lands, both of waking and of dream. As the men of Sarnath beheld more of the beings of Ib, their hate grew, and it was not less because they found the beings weak, and soft as jelly to the touch of stones and arrows. So one day the young warriors, the slingers and the spearmen and the bowmen, marched against Ib and slew all the inhabitants thereof, pushing the queer bodies into the lake with long spears, because they did not wish to touch them, and because they did not like the great sculptured monoliths of Ib, they cast these also into the lake, wondering from the greatness of the labor, however the stones were brought from afar, as they must have been, since there is not like them in the land of Manar and the lands adjacent. Thus of the very ancient city of Ib was nothing spared, save the sea-green stone idol chiseled in the likeness of Bokrug, the water lizard. This the young warriors took back with them as a symbol of conquest over the old gods and beings of Ib, and as a sign of leadership in Manar. But on the night after it was set up in the temple, a terrible thing must have happened, for weird lights were seen over the lake, and in that morning the people found the idol gone, and the highest priest, Taran-ish, lying dead, as from some fear unspeakable. And before he died, Taran-ish had scrawled upon the altar of chrysolite, with coarse shaky strokes, the sign of doom. After Taran-ish, there were many high priests in Sarnath, but never was the sea green stone idol found. And many centuries came and went, wherein Sarnath prospered exceedingly, so that only priests and old women remembered what Taran-ish had scrawled upon the altar of chrysolite. Betwixt Sarnath and the city of Arlonek arose a cavern rout, and the precious metals from the earth were exchanged for other metals, and rare cloths and jewels, and books and tools for artificers, and all things of luxury that are known to the people who dwell along the winding river Ai and beyond. So Sarnath waxed mightily, and learned and beautiful, and sent forth conquering armies to subdue the neighboring cities, and in time there sat upon a throne in Sarnath the kings of all the land of Manar, and many lands adjacent. The wonder of the world and the pride of all mankind was Sarnath the magnificent, of polished desert quarried marble, where its walls in height 300 cubits, and in breadth 75, so that chariots might pass each other as men drove them along the top. For full 500 stadia did they run, being open only to the side towards the lake, where a green stone sea wall kept back the waves that rose oddly once a year at the festival of the destroying of Ib. In Sarnath were 50 streets, from the lake to the gates of the caravans, and 50 more intersecting them, with onyx where they paved, save those whereon the horses and camels and elephants trod, which were paved with granite. And the gates of Sarnath were as many as the landward ends of the streets, each of bronze, and flanked by the figures of lions and elephants, carven from stone no longer known among men. The houses of Sarnath were of glazed brick, and each having its wall guarded in crystal lake, with strange art where they builded, for no other city had houses like them. And travelers from Thrall and Arlonek and Kadathron marveled at the sighing domes where they were surrounded. But more marvelous still were the palaces and the temples and the gardens made by Zokar, the olden king. There were many places and palaces, the last of which were mightier than any in Thrall or Arlonek or Kadathron. So high were they that one within might sometimes fancy himself beneath only the sky. Yet when lighted with torches dipped in the oil of Dothar, their walls showed vast paintings of kings and armies, of a splendor at once inspiring and stupefying to the beholder. Many were the pillars of the palaces, all of a tinted marble and cavern into designs of surpassing beauty. And in most of the palaces the floors were mosaics of beryl and lapis lazuli and sardonyx and carbuncle and other choice materials, so disposed that the beholder might fancy himself walking over beds of the rarest flowers. And there were likewise fountains which cast scented waters about in pleasing jets arranged with cunning art. Outstanding all other was the palace of the kings of Manar and the lands adjacent. On a pair of golden crouching lions rested the throne, many steps above the gleaming floor, and it was wrought of one piece of ivory, though no man lives who knows whence so vast a piece could have come. In that palace there were also many galleries and many amphitheaters, where lions and men and elephants battled at the pleasure of the kings. Sometimes the amphitheaters were flooded with water conveyed from the lake in mighty aqueducts, and then were enacted stirring sea fights, or combats betwixt swimmers and deadly marine things. Lofty and amazing were the 17 tower-like temples of Sarnath, fashioned of a bright multicolored stone not known elsewhere. A full 1,000 cubits high stood the greatest among them, wherein the high priest dwelt, with a magnificent scale less than that of the kings. On the ground were halls as vast and splendid as those of the palaces, where gathered throngs in worship of Zokalar and Tamesh and Laban, the chief gods of Sarnath, whose incense enveloped shrines were as the thrones of monarchs. Not like the Icons or other gods were those of the Zokalar and Tamesh and Laban. For so close to life were they that one might swear the graceful bearded gods themselves sat at the ivory thrones. And upending steps of zircon were the tower chamber, wherefrom the high priest looked out over the city and the plains and the lake by day, and at the cryptic moon and significant stars and planets and the reflections in the lake at night. Here was done the very secret and ancient rite and destination of Bolkarug, the water lizard, and here rested the altar of chrysolite where bore the doom scroll of Tarnan Ish. Wonderful likewise were the gardens made by Zokar, the olden king. In the center of Sarnath they lay, covering a great space and encircled by a high wall, and they were surmounted by a mighty dome of glass, through which shone the sun and moon and planets when it was clear, and from which were hung fulgent images of the sun and moon and stars and planets when it was not clear. In summer the gardens were cooled with fresh odorous breezes skillfully wafted by fans, and in winter they were heated with concealed fires, so that in those gardens it was always spring. There ran little streams over bright pebbles, dividing meads of green and gardens of many hues, and spanned by a multitude of bridges. Many were the waterfalls and their courses, and many were the lilied lakelets into which they expanded. Over the streams and lakelets rode white swans, whilst the music of rare birds chimed in with melody of the waters. In ordered terraces rose the green banks, adorned here and there with bowers of vines and sweet blossoms, and seats and benches of marble and porphyry. And there were many small shrines and temples where one might rest or pray to small gods. Each year there was celebrated in Sarnath the feast of the destroying of Ib, at which time wine, song, dancing, and merriment of every kind abounded. Great honors were then paid to the shades of those who had annihilated the odd ancient beings, and the memory of those beings of their elder gods was derided by dancers and lutanists crowned with roses from the gardens of Zokar. And the kings would look out over the lake and curse the bones of the dead that lay beneath it. At first the high priestess liked not these festivals, for there had descended among them queer tales of how the sea-green Echion had vanquished, and how Tarna Ish had died from fear and left a warning. And they said that from their high tower they sometimes saw lights beneath the waters of the lake. But as many years passed without calamity, even the priests laughed and cursed and joined in the orgies of the festers. Indeed, had they not themselves in their high towers often performed the very ancient and secret rite and destination of Bolkarug, the water lizard? And 1,000 years of riches and delight passed over Sarnath, wonder of the world. Gorgeous beyond thought was the feast of the 1,000th year of the destroying of Ib. For a decade had it been talked of in the land of Manar, and as it drew nigh, there came to Sarnath on horses and camels and elephants men from Thrall, Alarenek, and Catheridon, and all the cities of Manar and the lands beyond. Before the marble walls, on the appointed night, were pitched the pavilions of princes and the tents of travelers. Within this banquet hall reclined Nargis Hay, the king drunken with ancient wine from the vaults of conquered Panath, and surrounded by feasting nobles and hurrying slaves. There were eaten many strange delicacies at that feast, peacocks from the distant hills of Amplan, heels of camels from the Nazik desert, nuts and spices from Sadathrian groves, and pearls from the wave-washed metal dissolved in the vinegar of Thrall. Of sauces there were an untold number, prepared by the subtlest cooks of all Manar, and suited to the palate of every feaster. But most prized of all the viands and the great fishes was the lake, each of vast size, and served upon golden platters set with rubies and diamonds. Whilst the king and his nobles feasted within the palace, and viewed the crowning dish as it awaited them on golden platters, others feasted elsewhere. In the tower of the great temple the priest held revels, and in pavilions without the walls the princes of neighboring lands made merry. And it was the high priest Naaka who first saw the shadows that descended from the gibbous moon into the lake, and the damnable green mist that arose from the lake to meet the moon and to shroud in a sinister haze the towers and the domes of fated Sarnath. Thereafter those in the towers and without the walls beheld strange lights on the water, and saw that the grey rock Akurion, which was wont to rear high above in the near shore, was almost submerged. And fear grew vaguely yet swiftly, so that the princes of Alarnec and of Farbrokol took down and folded their tents and pavilions and departed, though they scarce knew the reason for their departing. Then, close to the hour of midnight, all the bronze gates of Sarnath burst open and emptied forth a frenzied throng that blackened the plain, so that all the visiting princes and travelers fled away in fright. For on the faces of this throng was wrought a madness born of horror undurable, and on their tongues were words so terrible that no hearer paused for proof. Men whose eyes were wild with fear shrieked aloud of the sight within the king's banquet hall, where through the windows were seen no longer the forms of Nagas-Hay and his nobles and slaves, but a horde of indescribable green voiceless things with bulging eyes, pouting flabby lips, and curious ears, things which danced horribly, bearing in their paws golden platters set with rubies and diamonds and containing uncaught flames. And the princes and travelers, as they fled from the doomed city of Sarnath on horses and camels and elephants, looked again upon the mist-begetting lake and saw the grey rock, Akurion, was quite submerged. Through all the land of Manar and the land adjacent spread the tales of those who had fled from Sarnath, and caravans sought that accursed city and its precious metals no more. It was long ere any travelers went thither, and even then only the brave and adventurous young men of yellow hair and blue eyes who are no kin to the men of Manar. These men indeed went to the lake to view Sarnath, but though they found the vast still lake itself and the grey rock Akurion, which rears high above it near the shore, they beheld not the wonder of the world and pride of all mankind. Where once had risen walls of 300 cubits and towers yet higher, now stretched only the marshy shore, and where once had dwelt 50 million of men, now crawled the detestable water lizard. Not even the mines of precious metal remain. Doom had come to Sarnath. But half buried in the rushes was spied a curious green idol, an exceedingly ancient idol, chiseled in the likeness of Bokarug, the great water lizard. That idol, enshrined in the high temple of Arlanek, was subsequently worshipped beneath the gibbous moon throughout the land of Manar. Yeah, rather different story by Lovecraft, and as you can clearly see, this is very much fantasy. And canon speaking, most of the dream cycle stuff we will read will have taken place before the temple in Dagon. Some of it doesn't. Some of it takes place after, because it's a character from the waking world then going into this dream world where Sarnath still is and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it's a cool story because it's kind of like a retelling of, Rome, I guess. This great city falls due to its own hubris, stuff like that. It's cool, and adds an interesting layer to the mythology of Lovecraft's world. And you can also see, if you can't already tell from this story, definitely by when we start reading more dream cycle stories, how this very much inspired Berserk, those animes, which then later inspired the Dark Souls games and Bloodborne. So a lot of the even Lovecraft's dream cycle stuff still resonates with fantasy authors, because he was very much inspired by Lord Dunsany, who also was inspired Tolkien too. So Lord Dunsany stuff is really bizarre, and I will, if it is public domain, which I think it should be, I'll read some of his stuff. But it's almost like you find some kind of ancient holy text from a different dimension, like it's like a different, it's so awesome. Like you can see how it inspired Lovecraft and Tolkien and all this stuff, like with all these different fairies and gods and goddesses and demigods and cosmic beings and all these fantastical fantasy creatures. It's awesome, but some may not like those because it's too, some people, it's kind of like the Silmarillion, if you've read that. I totally probably just mispronounced that. So a lot of people may not like that kind of style because it's kind of hard to get into, because it's like weird. And so I can understand why some don't like Lovecraft's Dream Cycle, but I just wanted to read that one because I think it's awesome. I think it's metal. And I will also then do I think the well, let me see. What else we got in here? Yeah, we might do Salafas and the White Ship. We'll see. Well, that's about it for this video. I know it's kind of short. It's a very short story. There's not much more I can talk about this story until we read further Dream Cycle stories. So until then, I will see you next time. Stay salty and stay spooky. Cthulhu Fatagan.